Hi, and welcome to another episode of Emerald Isle Vacation Home Specialist. I am your host, Dennis Richkowski. Some of you recognize me as the co-owner of Flip Flops Donuts, and some of you know me as your broker of real estate who specializes in waterfront and water view properties along the Crystal Coast, especially on Bogue Banks and in my town of Emerald Isle, North Carolina. On this channel, you will find essential information from the inside scoops on buying and selling homes to how to live with the ocean, rivers, and sounds that define the Crystal Coast. Today's episode is all about Salter Path, the oddest town on Bogue Banks. Whether you visit here occasionally or live here full-time, knowing the history, value, and affordability of real estate in Salter Path is a story worth telling. Before I begin, please subscribe to my video channel below or at the end of this episode. Local historians say that settlers were established in Salter Path by the mid-1800s, but there was no property deed since they simply set up homesteads and worked the sea and land where they lived. As the local whaling industry slowly failed in the late 1800s, some bankers moved their houses to Salter Path from Diamond City, out on Shackleford Banks, either board by board or floating them across on boats. The exodus picked up speed after a devastating hurricane in 1899. One North Carolina history book says, quote, most of the folks on the other end of Shackleford Banks went down to Bogue Banks to a place called Gillikin's, now known as Salter Path, unquote. Gillikin? Like many of the Outer Banks fishing villages, there is some debate about how Salter Path got its name. The one heard most often is perhaps a bit too logical. Over the years, where the fishermen went from their homes on the Sound side to work in fish camps on the beach, there was a well-worn permanent path by Riley Salter's home, hence the name Salter's Path. In the 1950s, the bank's most prominent resident was Alice Green Hoffman, a New York socialite who lived in what is now called Pine Knoll Shores. Dubbed the Queen of Bogue Banks, Hoffman lived in a large house with modern conveniences like electric lights on her estate facing Bogue Sound. To run her household, she employed many individuals from Salter Path, including the legendary Aunt Charity, who worked as her cook. Aunt Charity was the matriarch of the community, and along with her husband, told many stories about the origins of Salter Path. In the back of Hoffman's large estate, which included much of the island, local fishers used an old shack nicknamed Mrs. Hoffman's Tea Room for their nets. Some local folks despised Hoffman because she did not allow them to roam about collecting firewood. She wanted her share from the fishing and would call the sheriff to tell people to leave her property. During this time, some residents lived on Hoffman's property where their ancestors were squatters. Determined to end the controversy over the land and who owned it, Hoffman filed a suit in Carteret County Superior Court, and in 1923, the court settled the dispute, allowing 35 squatters to stay on the land and obtain deeds for their property. In the 1950s and 1960s, the village began to grow. Fishers gathered at Irvin Smith's store and exchanged fishing stories. Most of these fishers were competitive. The competition was not always for money. The competition was for who caught the prettiest scallops and the prettiest shrimp. Salter Path women would get together at each other's houses, share village news, and eat homemade biscuits. Sometimes they would also sing out on their front porches. As more development occurred in the 1970s and 1980s, the community began to change. Before, the residents thought they owned the island. They hunted and got wood. They walked where they wanted to. Then they found out that the island belonged to other people. Today, the community is built up of many businesses and homes. However, it is still home to many of the same families who occupied it for generations, including the Frosts, Smiths, Guthries, Willises, and Lewises. Many of the native residents, trace their roots to these few men who settled here. Many of these residents were and remain fishers. Today, only a few work the water, however, and they do so only on a part-time basis. For example, each fall, Henry Frost, his son Joey, and their crew fish for mullet, using beach seines along the Atlantic Ocean. Using a stop net that is designed to stop migrating schools of fish, the crew pull in striped mullets using a farm tractor to haul the net. Last year, they pulled in some 30,000 pounds in one day, or 14 pickup truckloads. In this tiny community, the seafood businesses also are disappearing. During the 1960s, there were about 8 fish houses in Salter Path. Now only Homer's Point Marina and Seafood and Willis's Seafood Market remain. Some natives aren't happy about the new residents or the surge in tourism. They often reflect on the changes by saying it was nice growing up here. Now, tourists and dingbats have taken over. Despite the changes, the old-timers still treasure the community. People from Salter Path still care about being from Salter Path and preserving the memories of fishing. Want to retire or move to the Crystal Coast? Salter Path is an enticing option. Filled with primarily residential neighborhoods and an overall quieter atmosphere, this community is tight-knit but friendly, with plenty of water views to go around. Salter Path is a beautiful representation of the Outer Banks culture at its most pure. With a small-town feel that's sprinkled with enticing gift shops, restaurants, and charter fishing services, this destination will appeal to anyone who wants to experience the Crystal Coast at its most authentic best. To learn more about residential and commercial real estate opportunities in Salter Path, or to subscribe to my newsletter, call or text your email address to 919-308-2292. To learn more about real estate elsewhere along the Crystal Coast of North Carolina, sign up for my blog on my website, www.eihomesforsale.com, and subscribe to Emerald Isle Vacation Home Specialist on YouTube at the end of this video. Stay well and stay safe. So come on down, please subscribe to my channel below, and definitely return next week to the same bat channel at the same bat time of 9 a.m. on Thursday for yet another episode of Emerald Isle Vacation Home Specialist.